but I am beloved by the night. You will taste my powers.
I'll kill you and the knight!
Interesting. Now the curtain rises on this delightful little game.
I know a lot of you may find it very hard to believe what I'm about to say, but there was once a time when Konami was one of the coolest video game companies out there. When seeing that iconic red logo brought with it a sense of excitement and wonder, rather than bitterness and dread. I've been a massive fan of Konami games pretty much my entire life, but this series has eluded me. I've only ever really played a tiny amount of Castlevania despite being able to look at it and tell you that it's everything I love in a game. That all changes now, and so I'm starting at the beginning, not developmentally, but chronologically. This is Castlevania: Lament of Innocence. Released in North America on October 21st, 2003 for the Sony PlayStation 2, Castlevania: Lament of Innocence takes the series all the way back to the beginning. Though the original game may have just been a fun little game based on Bram Stoker's Dracula, this game is rewriting everything, establishing a wholly original and powerful lore to its franchise, offering a much more compelling and tragic origin to the seemingly eternal battle of the Belmont clan against Vlad Dracula Tepesh and all the creatures of the night. Lament of Innocence would be a powerful, solidifying force for the series, as it would be written and heralded by the esteemed Koji Igarashi, who also wrote and led development of the very popular Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Igarashi had a vision for the franchise, one much darker and more cohesive than past titles had been with their inconsistent art styles and ideas, striving to get the series away from its reliance on the Bram Stoker novel and offer it a unique identity. Lament of Innocence wouldn't be the first in Igarashi's attempts to achieve this, but it would be the first 3D game in the series to receive this treatment. The game takes on a third-person, action-adventure hack-and-slash model of gameplay, similar to something you'd see in a game like Capcom's Devil May Cry, which released just a couple of years earlier, also for the PS2. And speaking of the PS2, Lament of Innocence was only ever really released for the PS2, but it was the first Castlevania game to do so. Unfortunately, the game did not see a port to any other console, which is honestly kind of strange to me. You'd think Konami would have paid more attention to what its competitors were doing at the time, like Capcom, who were trying to cover every console market they could. Lament of Innocence could have made a really stellar Nintendo GameCube game, and with its edgy art style, would have been right at home on the Microsoft Xbox. Maybe there were some rights or licensing issues, or perhaps Konami didn't think it would make enough money on those consoles to justify the ports, but I mean, the game is there already, like it's done. You just have to port it. I don't understand what reason there could have been to keep it locked to the PlayStation 2. But if you had to pick one, I guess that would be the console to lock it to. Technologically speaking, Lament of Innocence is the third game in the series to attempt a full 3D gameplay experience, the first two being the N64 titles Castlevania 64 and Legacy of Darkness. And I think it pulls it off well. It looks great, controls mostly as expected, and feels great to play. Now, the game does start on quite a lengthy opening cutscene. I'm not going to front and pretend I don't love this game. I do. I had not played it really until I sat down to do so for this video, but after doing so, I can confidently state, this game rules. That being said, this was such a bad way to open the game. This is a bad way to open any game. The first 15 minutes after turning the game on will be spent watching a text crawl of exposition, and then watching a lengthy cutscene about Leon meeting a character named Ronaldo. It's too long. It's fine if that stuff is in there, but the first thing this game should have given us was something exciting. The better route would have been to open on a small battle with Leon fighting heretics in the Crusades. Show us, don't tell us. This would have taught us the controls, shown us what we need to know about the setting, and opened the game on combat to play with before we get an exposition dump. Wouldn't have been hard either, just give us a single room arena and spawn in some NPCs to fight. That's it. But that aside, let's talk about the exposition. We're in the 11th century, 1094 to be specific, where Leon has been spending his days fighting against the heretics and enemies of God as a knight. He and his comrade and fellow knight Matthias Conquest have by this point become known as an invincible unit. However, over a year ago, Matthias' wife fell ill and died, which left Matthias struck with grief, and he eventually became bedridden and left the unit. Leon held up by himself for the next year, but in that time, horrible monsters began appearing in the wild. Leon became concerned with this and requested of the church that they allow him to leave and confront the cause of these monsters. They denied his request and told him that the heretics took all precedent at the moment. Then, just before the events of this game, Matthias sought out Leon to inform him that Sarah Trontoul, the woman he had intended to marry, had been kidnapped by a known vampire and taken deep into the forest called Eternal Night, where she was now held within a castle. This castle was owned by a vampire named Walter Bernhard, who delighted in the different hunters who wandered into his forest or castle in hopes of defeating him. He looked forward to the chance to play with them and hunt them down before killing them. Leon is informed of these things by a local alchemist who lives in the forest named Ronaldo Gandolfi. After telling Leon of these things, he gives him a weapon to help him destroy the creatures that await him in the castle. A whip made from alchemy. Leon trusts Ronaldo after hearing that he was friends with Matthias, as Matthias is Leon's closest friend. Armed with his new whip on a quest to destroy a powerful vampire and save his beloved, Leon marches through the castle gates.
Sarah, wait for me. I'm coming to save you.
Lament of Innocence opens with us outside of Ronaldo's shop. The air is damp, the night is dark, and the woods surround us. The atmosphere is fantastic. I just wish we could have gotten a lead up to this point. However, this is our first chance to control Leon, so I familiarize myself a bit with his movement in combat, and then find my way to the next area. A beautiful backdrop of a dark forest paints the scene behind us, looming as Leon approaches the castle gate. It seems someone is expecting us. Lowering the gate, we were welcomed in willingly. The screen says we are in the prelude to the dark abyss. So we enter the castle and behold the antechamber, wherein the entrance to the main palace lies, locked behind 5 large orb-like structures. In order to pass through and slay the vampire within, we'll have to hunt down and destroy these massive, abominable monsters he's harboring inside of his castle, represented by these orbs. That means a little additional explanation is in order. The game slowly introduces us to a few core mechanics, giving us a chance to learn how things work, like traversal with the whip for instance, where Leon grabs onto ledges in order to climb. I actually love this, but it is kind of janky to control. Once we finally get to try our hands at some real combat, the game prompts us with some additional tutorial screens. I don't love this to be honest, but it happens pretty much the whole game, and I got used to it pretty quick. I still hold to the idea that I think we should have had the chance to get some of this done in a prelude mission before we even get to the castle. Nevertheless, here we are, and these rooms essentially act as a combat and traversal tutorial before you are let free to roam the castle at your own pace. This is one of those games that keeps getting better the more you play it, but the opening 30 or so minutes really misses the mark in a lot of ways. I worry that this misstep may have put off potential players who stopped before giving it a real chance. To those that did give up too soon, it's their loss because this game does get so much better. We press on into a smaller room used for transporting us to the different sections of the castle where the beasts are kept. We can do these in pretty much any order we like, but I think there are some you have to do later and some you can do sooner. I'm not actually sure. So the order in which I progress will not necessarily reflect the order in which you experienced the game. After stepping onto the magical portal, I am taken to a section of the castle called the House of Sacred Remains. A staple of these Castlevania games is sectioning off different areas by aesthetic and in-world function, then giving them the coolest name imaginable. So while playing through this house, I was still familiarizing myself with what the game was expecting of me. learning the moves and getting used to the way the game flowed, not to mention testing the different secondary items, of which there are several. I'll talk about them later. But for my playthrough, I pretty much only used the cross after getting it because something about crusading through a gothic castle, vanquishing the night hordes through the power of God, felt appealing to me. The area starts in a very cathedral-styled building and then slowly takes you through the building into the dark crypts below. Each area feels unique and compelling to progress through, while always paying off with an exotic and interesting boss battle upon reaching the end of the section. That being said, I kind of feel like the House of Sacred Remains was the least aesthetically unique of the bunch. At first, I thought maybe it was just because I played it first and didn't give myself a chance to drink it all in like I did with the others, since I'd figured out the game by that point. But no, I went back and replayed through this one after beating the game and can confirm that it's the weakest aesthetically out of the bunch. The same cannot be said of this level's boss battle. Upon entering the boss's chamber, Leon finds a room of disgusting flesh-like growth with organic orifices everywhere and a large tapeworm-like beast that flies around and breathes fire. This is the undead parasite, and it's pretty gross. Nevertheless, we vanquish the loathsome beast, and what remains is a blue orb. These orbs give us an upgrade to our secondary weapon, in my case, the cross. I then use a portal to go back to Ronaldo's cabin to refill our potions. 1 down, 4 to go. Most people probably go the same route as me since the game lures you into the House of Sacred Remains by putting an object on top of the portal to it that floats and glows, that object being a map. After that, however, we pretty much pick the order of the next 4 freely. So we head back through the castle and back to the lobby where we head for the next area, the Anti-Soul Mysteries Lab. This is apparently the tower of an alchemist, which makes sense given the name and aesthetic of the tower. That's one of the really cool things about this game. It really leans heavy on the environmental storytelling for pretty much everything that isn't related to the main plot. While making our way through this tower, we can see all kinds of different laboratories and a variety of interesting equipment. Beakers, bottles, bookshelves with hundreds of books, and even a giant telescope. Like I said before, this game is densely packed with some really cool environments. I love the giant gears and pulley systems we see built into the walls throughout this section. We even get to a room with a giant furnace in it, which is honestly pretty cool, I think. Then we have the boss battle of this level. In order to summon him, we need to attain a stone with the letter E on it and place it into this large wall upon which the Hebrew word meth is inscribed. When translated to English, it means death. Upon entering the E stone, however, the word is changed to Emeth, which in Hebrew translates to mean truth. After inserting the stone tablet to complete the word, a series of boulders that lay scattered across the room suddenly pulled together to form a giant golem. For those of you who don't know, the concept of golems originates from Jewish folklore, which is why they used the Hebrew words to bring it to life. Not to mention, much of the occultist symbolism we see across the castle comes from Jewish Kabbalist mysticism. So the fact that this golem has been pulled together from inanimate boulders using alchemy is actually pretty accurate to the real mythology from what I was reading when researching for the video. Either way, it's evil, violent, and must perish in our wake so Leon can progress. With the power of the cross, Leon destroys the reprehensible creature born of dark magic and turns it back to the pile of pebbles it should have stayed. After that, we collect our reward in the form of a red orb and head back to Ronaldo's once again. We refill our potions and ascend back towards the castle gates. We still have 3 more beasts to slay before we can confront the person standing between Leon and his beloved Sarah. The portal takes us this time to what looks to be the underground of the castle, an area called the Dark Palace of Waterfalls. If you ask pretty much anyone, they'll tell you of all the locations we visit, this is one of the most elaborate. This is due to the level design not connecting back to itself as often as other areas, tighter corridors with more enemies making it more difficult to navigate, and 2 boss battles instead of 1. Deep down in these wretched sewers, of course, we see a tunnel of disgusting fish-man hybrids. These mermen are pretty common creatures in the Castlevania lore, so it's cool to see them featured here too. And the level design does get pretty confusing, not to mention there are various environmental dangers, like a room full of giant bladed pendulums, really keeping with the gothic vibe of the whole thing. Eventually, a new boss reveals himself to us, and his identity may surprise you. It's actually not quite as hard of a boss as you might think if you're pretty high aggro. Shadow Leon seems to mimic your moves, which is what we would expect, but his arsenal seems to be less complete than ours at this point. I like this idea a lot, actually. It's pretty fun to fight a variation of yourself like this. This is a doppelganger, a demon that takes the form of the player, making it a simulacrum of Leon in every way. This is more of a mini-boss than a real boss, and there's actually a few mini-bosses that I'll talk about later on. For now, that's about as deep as it goes, but even after beating the creature, it will reappear later. Following that, we get to ride a skeletal roller coaster. Who put this here? No, really, who built this? It's a pretty cool mechanic though, if a little frustrating to deal with. Surprisingly, this only ever appears in the Dark Palace of Waterfalls, but it does happen a couple of times, at least it did in my playthrough. There's still a boss left to take down though, because the doppelganger wasn't this stage's boss. In fact, pretty much every area has more than one boss, but I was not aware of that at first, so I'll talk about that later. When we finally get the gate lowered and gain access to this level's boss, we are able to confront them.
Is someone there? Are you a prisoner here?
Who are you?
My name is Leon. And you are?
My name is Raheem Armstair. It's too bad you aren't Walter.
This feeling. Are you a vampire?
That's right, lowly human.
Why is a vampire locked away here?
Shut up! Damn Walter. I would have won were it not for his ebony stone.
Ebony stone. What's that?
If you want to know. Beat me! It'll be a nice prelude to defeating Walter. I'll beat you. To a pulp!
Joachim Armstair was a former lieutenant for Walter Bernhard, whom was turned into a vampire to serve Walter. His anger for having lost against Walter during an attempted coup against him has caused Joachim to go nearly mad while in this isolation. The coup failed, obviously, and one of the keys to Walter's upper castle was hidden down here with Joachim, prisoned forever. Or rather, until Leon comes along. The battle itself isn't like super difficult, but it is fairly challenging. I enjoyed the battle overall, and he's a cool enough character. Not cool enough to stick around, mind you, because he is nothing compared to the power of the Belmont bloodline.
To think I lost to a human.
You promised. Answer me. What is the ebony stone?
A stone made with alchemy. It creates the never-ending darkness in this forest.
Hence eternal night. But the night should help you as well, since you're a vampire.
That stone chooses its master. My powers pale beside his. Oh, if only I had the Crimson Stone.
The Crimson Stone. He mentioned alchemy. Perhaps Ronaldo might know something.
Another villain of the night destroyed and another orb collected. It seems these alchemy stones are of significance.
I have a question, Ronaldo.
Don't you always? Ask away.
The ebony and crimson stones.
What about them?
You knew about them. Why didn't you tell me?
How would that have changed anything? The night still wouldn't have ended.
True, but...
Well, I would have told you. I shall tell you now.
Please.
stones made from alchemy, one that has cast an eternal night across the forest we dwell in, hence the name. It seems also to double the power of the vampire who wields it, this so-called ebony stone. If Walter has it, then it's obvious that's going to be a problem. That said, there's only 2 areas left to explore and 2 more beasts to conquer. Making my way back to the inner chamber, I'm left to choose which area of the castle to explore next, and I choose the Garden Forgotten by Time. Man, I love these over-the-top names. This section is a large labyrinth of stone structures and organic growth. Some of my favorite sections show the pouring rain outside, which doesn't make a lot of sense because when we go outside, it's not raining at all. I'm not even going to pretend I knew the actual purpose of these giant plants at first either. I could tell they were for something because they weren't an actual threat, but it wouldn't be until I'd already beat the game that I went back and discovered what they're meant for. This section took me about 20 minutes longer to figure out than the other ones just due to the unorthodox nature of the map. I was constantly unsure on if certain areas relied on abilities I had yet to discover since you discover them as you go. But it turns out, no, you can access every part of every area with the base skill set. It's just some of it takes some problem-solving skills. The gargoyle enemies are introduced in this level as well, and they're one of the most frustrating things to fight, at least for me. Oh yeah, did I mention Leon unlocks the Grand Cross ability when he collects the yellow orb? And it's the coolest Castlevania power ever? Using these new abilities, we're able to access the next boss door after an arduous push through this castle's garden and into the next boss area.
Welcome! I haven't had any visitors in a while. With that body, you'll make an excellent statue.
All those stone statues were...
A wonderful sight, weren't they? Don't worry, you'll be joining them soon enough.
Are you the legendary monster that turns people to stone?
Monster? What insolence! I'll grind you to dust!
Medusa is actually a common enemy in the franchise apparently, but her role in this game is much larger than in previous games. She has lines and serves as a creature working under Walter Bernhard. We're shown that she's turned several past warriors who faced her down to stone, and now Leon has come to put an end to her. I just need to say that this is fulfilling some kind of Greek myth fanboy fantasy for me, because the story of Perseus is like my favorite of the ancient Greek myths. I hate Medusa, and more specifically, I hate the weird follow-up lore that tried to paint her as some sympathetic victim character. Let me give you some real-world history lore for a second. Medusa is a gorgon. She was created and written by Hesiod in his poem Theogony specifically as a monster and a menace to mankind. She was a wretched creature, and Perseus utilized his cunning and athleticism to rid the world of her presence. Hundreds of years later, a Roman poet named Ovid wrote the poem Metamorphoses, where he depicted Medusa as a tragic victim who was assaulted by Poseidon upon Athena's shrine and cursed to have the hair of snakes by Athena in a rage for something that was out of her control. This idea came far later and was not by any means the original intention of her character when Hesiod created her. I look at Ovid's contribution as little more than a Roman fanfic of a Greek poem that came hundreds of years before he was even born. Anyways, back to the game, we utilize the power of the cross and the sting of our whip to destroy Medusa here and now to make her pay for all of the people she's murdered.
That whip is...
It's Ronaldo's whip. Apparently, it's effective even on legendary monsters.
It wasn't so powerful before. Did it gain its complete form?
Complete form?
Still, it's no match for my master!
Well, it seems Medusa had some things to say about this whip. It hasn't reached its complete version yet, but what does that mean? Well, Leon decides to confront Ronaldo about this whip and asked what Medusa meant by it not being in its complete form. Ronaldo dodges the question and tells Leon not to worry about completing the whip and tells him that it's not possible by any normal means. So Leon accepts his answer and we begin making our way back once again to the castle gate. We've only got one more boss battle to destroy, and so we head back through the antechamber and take the portal to the final area. The Ghostly Theater. The song for this one is a vibe, and I personally felt like it features a few of the more complicated environmental puzzles to deal with, but it didn't take me as long to power through this one as previous sections did. The aesthetic once again suits the name incredibly well. Everything is made of red curtains and ornate carpets. This entire section of the castle emanates a fittingly operatic atmosphere as we fight our way towards that final boss. An example of what I meant about the environmental puzzles can be seen here with these lasers. At first I thought I was missing an ability to get past them until I realized they turn off when I face a certain direction. Like, it really just takes you paying attention, but that's true of nearly every puzzle or challenge in this game. I eventually realized that anytime I didn't know what to do in this game, it wasn't because my character wasn't complete, but rather my understanding of the room or situation was, which is not something I can say about most modern games. While we're talking about environmental puzzles, let's talk about the Room of 1,000 Falls. It's not actually called that, I just made it up, but damn is it fitting. In order to get across this room, we have to navigate through a pitch black room while attempting to platform across a series of barely visible, literal platforms, which I'll talk about this a lot more in the next part, but let me just say for now that the platforming is very, very stiff in this game. I'm not even being hyperbolic when I say that this game probably would have seen an overall much better reception if this room and the other one like it had just been cut outright. Before you come at me about the purpose of it being here or the challenge it presents, a game's challenge shouldn't be because it's exploiting its own unresponsive and unrefined controls against you. I eventually got the hang of it and got what I needed from these rooms, but I do think their inclusion hurt the final product, and they should have been removed. There's only 2 rooms like this, and their removal would have only benefited the game. Finally, we get what we need and find the main stage room where we have to actually go into our menu and ring the bell item we found to summon this boss stage. It does not tell you to do this, but it wasn't hard to put together. This is how you do good game design. Let us players figure it out. I love it.
Sarah?
Leon, you came to save me.
Oh, thank goodness. I'm so glad you're not hurt.
I can't believe you're safe.
Let's get out of here first.
Yes.
Who are you?
Oh my. Too bad. And I thought this would work so well.
I was careless. It was obvious that it wouldn't be so easy.
I was going to let you die without any suffering because I liked the way you looked.
Well, that's just too bad.
But I've changed my mind. Your face warped in pain. Just the thought thrills me. Oh, this will be lovely.
Take notes, boys. Leon Belmont is on that Sigma male grind set and is unfazed by the simp spells being casted by this succubus. And I mean that last part very literally. What you're seeing on screen actually is a literal succubus demon. She literally does cast spells and curses on you. As you saw though, Leon isn't standing for any of it. Well, unless it hits him, in which case he does literally stand still, frozen, while she attacks and drains his health. It was probably the hardest of the 5 initial boss battles for me, but if you have a decent amount of health potions, then you'll be just fine. Just stay moving, time your blocks and dodges, and she should die pretty quickly.
If I had known this would happen, I would have fought you in the guise of your loved one. Then, like that old man, you would have...
Old man? You're talking about Ronaldo. What do you mean?
That old man... his own daughter...
And that's our final orb. Time now to restock on what we need and finally go confront the vampire we came here for. When we get to Ronaldo, Leon has many questions for him about this whip and why the succubus demon mentioned him while she was dying. Ronaldo tells his tale about the night his daughter was turned into a vampire by the very vampire we're here to kill. He was forced to kill his own daughter. Ronaldo becomes concerned that Leon will be distracted, but, well, let me just play it.
Forget everything I just said. Think only of yourself now. He's not an opponent you can beat while distracted.
No, you're wrong.
What do you mean?
The force of your grief can only make me stronger. Thank you. I am grateful.
Do as you will.
Now all that's left is to trek up to the castle and finally confront the vicious vampire once and for all. He's got Leon's love, and for that, we need to go pay him tribute. And by that I mean...
We're just gonna kill him!
Welcome to my castle. Pleased to meet you. I am the master of the castle, Walter Bernhard.
Give back Sarah!
Do not rush. Your lady is here.
Sarah! Why? Why won't she answer?
It seems the lady is tired. It seems you are too. Rest a while.
What?
Well, that whip is Ronaldo's, is it?
It can't be. My attack doesn't work.
I see. It's just as that knight said. Very well. You've made it this far. I'll return her as a reward.
Sarah!
Well, Leon's fiancée is under the vampire's spell, and so he tries to work his demon magic on Leon to make him submit. It doesn't work, however, because our boy Leon is a knight and submits only to God. Walter gives Sarah back to Leon and taunts Leon that he'll be waiting for him in the throne room. The next part is pretty much the crux of this game's story. Leon takes Sarah back to Ronaldo as she's in pain and barely conscious, but then something happens.
Sarah, what's the matter?
What's all this racket?
Ronaldo, Sarah suddenly...
Oh no. You go on inside.
But...
There's nothing you can do. Wait quietly inside.
Turns out Ronaldo has a force field around his house that keeps monsters out. particularly vampires. Leon's beloved Sarah has been turned into a vampire, or rather, she is turning, and the only way to stop the transformation would be to kill Walter immediately. The only problem with that, however, is that when Leon attacked Walter, it didn't even faze him. The vampire is seemingly immune to the power of the whip, and as such, Leon is presented with a very grave decision.
Isn't there another way?
Well, there is, but
Tell me, I'll do anything.
then let me ask you this. Can you kill that girl?
What are you saying?
If you make the whip complete, you can destroy him. But in order to do that, you need a tainted soul. One that trusts you, and one that you can trust.
I abandoned everything in order to save Sarah. I could never do such a thing.
Even knowing she's not human, it's a difficult thing to do. I'm not surprised.
Is she really? Is Sarah really?
There's no doubt about it. I confirmed the bite mark. The fact that the barrier responded is proof above all else.
Sarah!
Did she overhear us just now?
Sarah!
Please, stay away.
Sarah, calm down. Did you hear us talking? It's okay. Please, trust me. I will save you. I will. You'll see.
I appreciate how you feel, but I have no time left.
No time.
I can feel it. My heartbeat is weakening, and my blood is growing cold. I can feel myself changing into something inhuman. If my soul can save others, then I won't die in vain. I do not want anyone else to suffer my fate.
Why?
Please, if you still love me, please grant me my final wish.
I cannot.
You dishonor yourself, Leon. How do you think Sarah feels?
I know, Ronaldo. I do know, but
Leon, all that is needed now is your resolve.
Leon, I will be with you.
Ronaldo, what must I do?
So, you've decided. You must enter into a blood covenant with Sarah's soul. Focus your spirit on Sarah. All becomes one in infinity. The tainted soul joins his. Undesired and cursed soul. His blood accepts your hatred for the power to slay your kind. Now, use the whip against Sarah.
I swear to you, no more will suffer your fate!
Thank you, Leon.
Sarah.
Well, Leon now wields a weapon that he claims holds the power of hatred and destruction against vampires, and it's now appropriately called the Vampire Killer. With our new whip in hand, we sprint back up to storm this horrid castle of the night. This is honestly a really sad scene to watch, even with its campy execution. But it solidifies Leon as a tragic character who does what's right, even when it hurts him to do so. Also, let me just say, this was a massive missed opportunity to insert a rendition of the iconic Vampire Killer track. I cannot believe they didn't put that here with the literal creation of the weapon and with its very powerful origin. Instead, we get an original track, and one of the weaker ones at that. Firmly, this section should have been a rendition of Vampire Killer. I'm just imagining how sick it would have been to play that on the first floor of our new area, the Pagoda of the Misty Moon. Speaking of the new area, it's pretty much a combination of the puzzles and the enemies of all 5 previous levels scattered throughout one final section of the castle. The doppelganger returns, and we get to put an end to him once and for all in one final showdown. He's stronger this time than last, so it's a really good challenge. I like this part. Again, I can't help but imagine how much more of an impact this battle would have had if we were listening to Vampire Killer while taking down a mini-boss for the first time with the whip in its complete form. After destroying this creature, we fight our way through another few similar rooms until we reach the second floor, where we finally hear Leon's theme in full. And it pretty much makes up for the weak initial track of the first floor because this song is awesome. Before we can access the throne room, however, we'll need to trek our way to a nearby tower of the castle and attain a stone tablet, which we then need to insert into this larger mechanism. So we fight our way through it all, find the tablet. Oh, and there's another one of those dark rooms that demands platforming to get through, which sucks. But getting through all of that, we can finally climb the steps to the throne room and confront the vampire who stole the humanity of Leon's beloved.
Welcome. I have been waiting, Leon.
Walter, I will never forgive you.
I see. It seems you have enjoyed the gift that I gave you.
Yes. Thanks to that, I now have the power to defeat you.
Well, that power is quite something. But I am beloved by the night. You will taste my powers.
I'll kill you and the knight!
Interesting. Now the curtain rises on this delightful little game.
I don't even care. Say what you will. That line, cheesy as you may think it is, has become one of my favorite lines of all time.
I'll kill you and the knight!
What?
Now there is nothing left to protect you. I'll fulfill my promise to Sarah now!
Not yet. The power of the night is still full. I shall teach you the meaning of true terror.
Yeah, so this battle is actually a little difficult at first. Took me more than a few attempts to figure it out, and it's definitely a pretty massive difficulty spike from the other battles. That being said, it actually gets way easier after just a few attempts because you learn his attack patterns and then you can finish him off without taking very many hits. The thing that makes this fight so hard is that it leads directly into a second boss encounter. But before that, we have one more major reveal to tackle.
It can't be. This should not have happened.
Sarah's suffering. And Ronaldo's grief. Carve them into your cursed body and perish.
But with my powers, I will surely come back to life. I could not obtain the Crimson Stone. But someday, It will be mine.
So Leon overcomes Walter Bernhard, but then the vampire starts ranting about the Crimson Stone again when a skeleton appears and starts talking about taking Walter's soul. This is where the plot gets super convoluted out of nowhere. That skeleton is Death, like actual death, who offers the soul of Walter to the supposed actual wielder of the Crimson Stone. Who is that, you might ask?
This power I offer to the king who wields the Crimson Stone. Excellent. I never spent a better night.
Matthias?
You didn't disappoint me, Leon. I knew without a doubt that you would accomplish this.
What is the meaning of this?
I needed a powerful vampire soul. That is all.
Are you saying you used me?
Not just you. Your betrothed, Sarah, Ronaldo, and Walter. I used all of you.
If you're wondering who Matthias is, I don't blame you. He barely plays a role in the game and is mentioned once in the text crawl at the beginning, 2 times by Leon throughout the game, and then just shows up here like we're supposed to know who he is. You'll remember me talking earlier about this character, but I'll explain briefly what's going on in a second.
I sense a rage from this whip. Matthias, you abandoned humanity?
That's right. By becoming a vampire, I obtained eternal life. That was my goal. It was my revenge against God.
Revenge against God?
We have risked our lives and fought for the sake of God. But God mercilessly stole away the one I loved most. When all I ever wished for was Elizabetha's safety. If limited life is God's decree, then I shall defy it, and within that eternity, I shall curse him forevermore.
Matthias.
Yeah, Leon ain't buying it. Basically, these two were warrior knights until Matthias' wife died from a sickness which caused him to abandon the church and dedicate his life to living forever and raging against the will of God. He then tries to convince Leon to join him as a vampire, to which Leon responds by calling him a wretched fool. Leon rejects the offer, and so Matthias then gives up, leaves, and tells Death to kill Leon, which leads us to this final battle.
Farewell, Leon. Death is all yours.
Stop!
By my master's orders, you'll be destroyed here and now!
This is the part that gave me trouble, because it's like a second phase of Walter's boss battle. No saves or item buying, you need to make it all last through both battles. This was, in my opinion, a harder battle than the one against Walter. His attacks are less forgiving, and your room for error is much smaller. It took some work to learn his attack pattern, and I needed to be pretty frugal with my potions during the first battle to make it work, but I did manage to overcome him after a few attempts and put an end to this eternal night.
To think
I would be.
I have the power to destroy all related to the vampires. Though you have divine powers, you are no exception.
Unfortunately for you, as long as my master survives, I will rise from the dead.
I see. Give him this message. You have become a cursed being, and I will never forgive you. This whip and my kinsmen will destroy you someday. From this day on, the Belmont clan will hunt the night!
So, he did it.
And that's Castlevania Lament of Innocence, the origin of the Belmont clan and their centuries-long war against Dracula and the forces of evil. Oh yeah, and if you didn't figure it out yet, Matthias is Dracula. Or rather, he becomes Dracula. This really is the origin of Castlevania, the start of the long story. Two knights of the church, both who lost their brides. One who lost her to sickness and turned to evil to spend his existence defying nature and cursing the will of God. The other who had to kill her with his own hands to spare her humanity, and would live the rest of his life as a man and dedicate his bloodline to hunting all creatures of the night until they could one day find and slay Dracula. Which, if you're even remotely familiar with the franchise, you know is exactly what happens.
And so the story of the Belmont clan's struggle against evil begins. However, Matthias and the Belmonts will not meet again for hundreds of years.
You must be the Belmont.
Matthias goes into hiding in foreign lands and continues to curse God for eternity. Eventually, he names himself Lord of the Vampires, King of the Night. The years before their next meeting pass slowly and quietly, but with finality. The intermission in this exquisite play from which two souls will never escape.
Oh, and they did end up playing the Vampire Killer track. They used a soft rendition of the song for the credits. I can appreciate that, but I'd have preferred it was used in a more epic way earlier in the game than while the credits roll. The story is told almost entirely in the last hour or two of the game, with little bits of plot littered throughout the rest of the duration, but it's really a lovely story to see. This is the first Castlevania game I've ever beaten, and really it's the only one I've spent more than 3 or 4 hours with. And I loved it. Genuinely, one of the most enjoyable gaming experiences I've ever had. But as it turns out, after watching the credits roll, I realized there's quite a bit of additional content I did not even see on my first playthrough. So let's look at what I missed. Upon beating Lament of Innocence, we're shown that we have unlocked 2 more gameplay modes, In order to access them, we have to open a new save mode and name the profile either Yakim or, literally, the word crazy. We can go ahead and talk about crazy mode since there isn't much to say. If you found the game too easy but loved your time with it, you can go through the whole thing again but way harder. It's just another difficulty mode, that's all. It makes the enemies a lot stronger and limits your items from 9 down to only 5. Your reward for beating the game in this mode, however, is a really cool image, and a special item that allows you to use your secondary weapons without using up hearts. Which, by the time you've beaten the game on crazy mode, I can't imagine wanting to keep playing just to use that item, much less even needing such an item at that point. Well, there are people out there, though, who love a good challenge, and difficulty modes like this gives them more content and incentive to play the game, thereby increasing the value even more. So I am glad it's there, and if this game appeals to you in aesthetic and theme, but you need a pretty intense challenge to get into it, then I encourage you to just push through the game and beat it on normal mode as fast as possible, and then try to 100% it on crazy mode. The other mode in the game is Yakim mode, which I was not at all expecting. So for some reason they programmed it in so you can play through the entire game as Yakim. And it's not just like a model replacement situation, he plays totally differently than Leon. Honestly, he even seems kind of overpowered next to Leon. Beating the bosses is harder because Yakim can't use any items, but just getting through the stages is a joke because of how strong this character is. I played through the House of Sacred Remains to the boss and only took 2 hits, both from an environmental hazard, not an enemy. Did I mention he can fire a giant laser? Other than that, nothing really changes except, of course, the lack of cutscenes, with exception of one, which makes it a little weird that you fight yourself when you get to the Yakim boss battle. If you do manage to beat the game, you're shown a special cutscene of Yakim sitting on Walter Bernhardt's throne and laughing, having finally achieved his victory. Also, you unlock a third additional hidden mode. It's called Pumpkin Mode, and you'll never guess what it is. Leon's character is replaced with a pumpkin model, and you play through the whole game as a pumpkin version of Leon. That's pretty much it, except the pumpkin starts off with all of the abilities Leon has already unlocked and higher stats. Beating this mode unlocks some pictures of said pumpkin for the player to see. I have no idea why they put that much effort into these little hidden modes, but there they are, I guess. That's the additional game modes in Lament of Innocence, but as it turned out, there's quite a bit of content within the base game I completely missed on my initial playthrough. When I first entered this portal lobby right when I started playing, I went through this door that led me down a long winding staircase and into a massive prison room. That room then opened access to a save room and a locked door. Beneath me, I could hear the rustling of chains and a very low grumbling sound. There was something down there, something big, but I couldn't get to it, so I figured it would end up being a boss I'd need to defeat later in the game. Except, that never happened. I never needed to fight whatever that thing was from the time I started the game to watching the credits roll. So of course I had to boot it back up again and go down there to investigate. So I went back into the Pagoda of the Misty Moon and I found the Jewel of Unlocking, which acted as a key to let me access yet another long winding staircase. At the bottom of that staircase was a room called the Prison of Eternal Torture. Well, let's take a look at this thing. Okay, so it turns out there's a gigantic optional boss down here called the Forgotten One, and when I tried to fight this monster, it totally destroyed me, which left me wondering if I was missing something or if I just needed to get good. Well, I looked it up to see if there was a strategy, and I saw that the Ice Whip was highly recommended. The what now? So, get this, there are multiple whips, which makes sense given you can select which whip you're using, but this was news to me. I'd already beaten the game by this point, so where are these whips then? Well, there were 3 more mini-bosses that I had yet to face, all 3 of which gave a different whip upon defeating them. These mini-bosses are called elementals. There's a flame elemental, a frost elemental, and a thunder elemental. So cue going back into the different sections of the castle to hunt these things down, kill them, and get my whips. And while I'm at it, I managed to find multiple more HP power-ups and different items to help out later. The ice elemental is hiding in the Dark Palace of Waterfalls, so I guess that's where I head first. Little did I know that between me and fighting that elemental would be my greatest challenge yet. A platforming section. I said this earlier, but the platforming in this game is the worst part. It's really hard not because it's difficult, but because it barely even works. Now, I'm more than happy to admit that once you do kind of figure out the jankiness of it, that it's not that bad, but it does not by any stretch work as you would think it should. More on that later. Getting to the ice elemental, I go in not knowing what to expect, but relatively concerned about dying and having to go through that awful platforming area again. As it turns out though, I had nothing to be concerned about. This boss is easy. I mean, it helps that my character is already really strong, and that this is apparently supposed to be an earlier boss to face, but since I did pretty much everything else first, it goes down pretty quick. I was relieved as well to see that entering the Anti-Soul Mysteries lab again, the Flame Elemental was equally as easy to overcome. Way easier to get to also. The final of the elementals, the Thunder Elemental, was a little bit more of a challenge to get to. Hiding deep in the Garden Forgotten by Time, this is where those big man-eating plants I mentioned earlier come into play. We have to use them to access these higher areas to find the Thunder Elemental, which we do find and make very short work of, thereby unlocking the Lightning Whip. With our new equipment in hand and several HP boosts stronger, we're ready to go and face the Forgotten One again. Heading back to the main castle, we head down the winding staircase to go summon our rematch with the beast that lives below. My powers have doubled since the last time we fought, yet still, this creature, according to the lore, despite being made by mortal hands, was so powerful that it nearly destroyed the world, and was locked up in the dungeon of this castle hundreds of years ago to rot away. So we're here to destroy it once and for all. Die, monster. You don't belong in this world. Here's a few interesting facts about this creature. It has the second highest amount of health points of any Castlevania boss from the entire series. It's considered to be one of the most memorable of Igarashi's bosses, and its disturbing design alone was the only thing that forced Lament of Innocence from being a T-rated game into having an M for mature rating. Likely due to the fact that it's a gigantic demon creature oozing maggots all over the player, and the way to kill it is to slash and sever its exposed organs with a whip. Finally though, after admittedly multiple attempts, I'm able to beat the creature down and finally destroy it for good. Doing this unlocks two different very cool things. The first being the Black Orb, which gives your side weapon another new ability, although I didn't like it as much as the White Orb's ability. The second thing we unlock is Boss Rush Mode, which is exactly what it sounds like. The player stocks up and then fights every boss from the game in order consecutively. It's another interesting mode, and it does give you the chance to test out all of the different items, orbs, and whips you've unlocked up to this point. This game is pretty stuffed with unlockable game modes if you hadn't noticed. Let's talk a bit about the actual gameplay on offer here. Castlevania Lament of Innocence definitely lives up to its namesake. If you've been around the industry for more than 5 minutes, you've probably heard the term Metroidvania thrown around before. This is obviously a combination of the video game titles Metroid and Castlevania, due to both game franchises sharing such a similar style of game design. Lament of Innocence really is one of the best instances of bringing that formula to a 3D space I think I've ever seen in my life. The level design, the character progression, the exploration, I mean, it's all simply brilliant. Then again, this part was easy. They had already seen how effective this type of level design and progression was in their past 2D titles. I think their biggest challenge came in having to find a way to adapt the combat to a satisfying 3D formula. And they did this by very wisely adopting a traditional hack-and-slash style of combat similar to what we'd seen in games like Devil May Cry or Onimusha Warlords. You probably know exactly what I'm talking about. Square is your light attack, triangle is your heavy, and you can mix and match to formulate different combos between the two. Circle is your ranged weapon, and you have a selection of different potential ranged weapons to choose from. Utilizing these tools, you move from arena to arena, hacking and slashing dozens of enemies in every area, typically because the doors to that arena lock and won't let you through until you've done so. I found the combat to be very satisfying personally, but I love games like this. The whip feels really fun to use, there's tons of interesting combos to play with, and every time you've acclimated to using your available moveset, you unlock a new one. There are a multitude of secondary sub-weapons to choose from, like the axe, knife, gem, holy water, and my favorite, the cross. Each of these has a variety of different functions depending on which orb you have equipped at the time. All of the enemies are varied, unique, and there are a ton of them across the game, so you always feel like you're finding new creatures to slay. All of that, not to mention the multiple special abilities you unlock with items like the sprint ability or the flaming step ability. There is enough here for anyone who really loves this kind of game to justify a second playthrough easily. Really, my only genuine complaint is about the platforming, which, I guess, yeah, it's finally time to talk about that. There isn't an insane amount of platforming in the game, but its inclusion is prominent enough to make the really unpolished nature of the mechanics sorely stand out. Leon's jump doesn't feel smooth at all, it's jarring and feels like an unfinished feature of the game, which makes all of this insane hidden content feel almost insulting because how were you able to put so much time into making all of this extra bonus content, but you couldn't refine Leon's jumping ability to respond as you would expect it to? Of course, yes, you can get familiar enough with how it works to work around the janky nature of how it all controls, but I don't really accept that as an excuse for it being the only user-unfriendly feature of the game. I've seen what speedrunners can do with games that barely function, okay? Just because the player can adapt doesn't always mean they should have to. If you're going to tell me that it's intentional to make the game feel harder and make the platforming feel more challenging, then, all I can say is that I don't personally think that was a very good design decision. First off, it hurt the game's reception. And second, I'm not a fan of the philosophy that a game's challenge should ever come from its controls not functioning as the player would expect. Besides that, however, I genuinely think this is a fantastic game. After playing my way through it all, I've seen just how excellent a 3D Castlevania game can be, and I'm walking away from the experience really frustrated knowing what would eventually become of the Castlevania games. The gameplay is awesome, the level design is fantastic, the art style and aesthetic is downright inspired. The graphics are exceptional for the time it was released. Honestly, this is something of a real hidden gem. Not to mention the story, which was everything I wanted and more. The campy dialogue wasn't in any way cringy to me, but instead, I was just totally endeared to its sincerity. Leon's character in all of his over-the-top camp just struck me as cool more than anything.
I'll kill you and the knight!
Castlevania Lament of Innocence is a spectacular showing of what a 3D Castlevania game is capable of, and a genuine treasure of a PlayStation 2 game. Castlevania Lament of Innocence was an incredible adventure, and to be honest, it's been one of my favorite games that I've ever played. The story is tragic, tight-knit, and frankly, really exciting. Leon's character may be simple, but I think he's inspiring, and he's got mad drip. It's one of those titles I'm always looking for that leaves me ready to hit the gym when I beat it. The whole experience is really brilliant, and I cannot believe how long it's taken me to actually get around to playing it. The game doesn't waste your time getting into the point. Well, outside of the opening cutscene, which takes far too long, but it's just a straightforward and fun time. I would not only jump at the chance to recommend this one to people, I actually did reach out to friends to tell them how great it was, and if this video has made you consider trying it out, then I strongly encourage you to do so. Unfortunately, doing so isn't as easy as I'd like. Yes, it's time to talk about ports. Lament of Innocence is pretty much locked to the PlayStation 2 and 3. No ports outside of a digital PS3 release have ever been made available, or as far as I'm aware, even discussed. So, if you're hoping to try this one out, then you'll either need a PS2 or a PS3 available to you. If you've got one of those, then a sure way to play it is on disc, if you can find it. It was also made available on the PSN store for a while, but I'm not sure if it still is. Emulation is an avenue if you've already got a physical copy on hand, he said for legal reasons. Just be aware that there is a glitch in the Dark Palace of Waterfalls when you face the doppelganger that causes the game to lock up. There's fixes available for this glitch that you can find, and some newer versions have also fixed this bug internally, I believe. As you can see, your options for trying this game out are pretty limited as of now, unfortunately, which is not only sad for players, but kind of hard to believe in general, since this feels like it would make an excellent Switch game. I mean, really, this game would flow so well as a Switch title. Food for thought, Konami. Okay, I think you get the idea by now. I really loved playing this game, and I think you should too. Cover art critique time. Lament of Innocence launched with 3 different cover arts for the 3 regions it released in: North America, Europe, and Japan. Let's take a look. I think it's pretty clear which of these is better. First off, one of these 3 is very clearly inferior, especially if you're a fan at all of the series. The European cover art was not illustrated by Castlevania aesthetic architect Ayami Kojima. For some reason, this one opted to use what looks like a version of the 3D model. Only a handful of games from the Castlevania series feature art illustrated by Ayami Kojima, but in my opinion, the titles that didn't have her suffered from her absence. Her style is so unique and manages to strike a beautiful balance between the gothic feeling of the game's setting and the powerful look of a dated hundreds of years old painting. I'd honestly probably think this European cover was cooler if the other 2 covers weren't so fantastic. Which, between those 2, I like the North American cover more, but it's a close choice. Let me know which cover you prefer in the comments. Now, a staple of any Castlevania game is its music. This franchise features multiple of the most iconic and compelling video game tracks ever made, which is possibly why Lament of Innocence feels a little lacking. I'd already listened to this soundtrack long before playing it, as I just like the music of the games in general, but for some reason this score just seems to fall a little flat for me. The majority of the OST feels forgettable, and even the tracks that stood out only did so for a small section of their totality. The shining exception to that statement is Leon's own theme, which, yeah, that one goes really hard. The melody repeating on the keys throughout is memorable and strikes a great balance of tragic yet determined. But aside from that one, far too many of these tracks feel overly arcade-like for the setting. While this may have worked for earlier titles, I feel like the synthy orchestra and over-reliance on synthy drum beats leads to the game's score sounding, well, synthetic. Symphony of the Night managed to sound significantly more grand, gothic, and operatic than this one did, while utilizing the same soundscapes and synths available to the team and on older hardware. Speaking of hardware and Symphony of the Night, that game sounded like it was at the peak of what the console it was on was capable of, while Lament of Innocence sounds like it's lagging far behind what its competitors at the time were doing on the same platform. Devil May Cry beat Lament of Innocence to market by nearly 2 years and seems to have a more standout sound using similar hardware in my opinion. All of that said, I do think that the Lament of Innocence soundtrack is still very impressive on its own, and while not as strong as a lot of competitors or even entries in its own franchise, there are a handful of very beautiful tunes and segments here, and Leon's theme specifically is one of the better video game themes to have ever been written. It's still probably better than 95% of the other soundtracks out there, just a little disappointing when put up against the better tracks from the series. Alright, let's talk about how the game was received now, because it's a little confusing. Looking up its reviews, ratings, and scores, Lament of Innocence seems to have been received very well. I mean, IGN and GameZone gave it a 9 out of 10 at the time, and its lowest scores hovered around the 7s and 8s, with a few exceptions leaving it with a Metacritic of 79. I feel like that's actually a pretty good score, and it's only that low because 1 or 2 outliers rated it unfairly low. Realistically, this game is easily a strong 8. So, why is that confusing, you might ask? Well, it's confusing because that doesn't match up with anything I'd heard before. I've been hovering around the Castlevania community for years, and while I never jumped into the games myself, I'd read all the lore, listened to the music, and interacted with many fans. I loved the series by proxy, but never really called myself a fan of it because it felt disingenuous. although given my strong adoration for other Konami titles like Metal Gear and Silent Hill, I'd always been Castlevania adjacent. In that time, the thing I'd always heard from everyone is that the 3D Castlevania games were all bad, and that Lament of Innocence was particularly a letdown. I'd even heard that Igarashi himself didn't really like Lament of Innocence, but I'm not sure where I heard that, nor can I find a source on it. So imagine how shocked I was to discover that this, apparently being one of the more maligned Castlevania games to come out, wasn't actually maligned at all on release, nor is it bad. In fact, it's great. I loved my time playing this, and it's easily one of the best I've played in years. Okay, but maybe the critic scores aren't accurate. I mean, after all, no one seems to understand video games less than professional games journalists. Fair enough. Except the user score on Metacritic shows it having an 8.5. Can someone tell me what I'm missing? Because what I was talking about hearing regarding this game being bad wasn't an isolated incident with a few people. Pretty much anyone I talked to on forums or in video comments or even in person that called themselves a Castlevania fan did not like this game. Was it just that the hardcore fans of the franchise didn't like the transition to 3D from the previously 2D side-scroller powerhouses of previous titles? I mean, I can see that, I guess, but it doesn't seem to reflect in the game's scores. So that brings another question. Why the hell didn't we get more games like this? Castlevania only really attempted this format twice before abandoning it for the reboot timeline. Which sucks, because although I haven't really played Curse of Darkness yet, I know it's the only other Castlevania game that plays like this. If any fans of the series have any thoughts on this phenomenon, please let me know what you think in the comments. And yeah, that's Castlevania Lament of Innocence. I'd pretty much never played it before doing so for this video, and the only other games I've played in the series before this are roughly an hour or two of Symphony of the Night, Curse of Darkness, and Lords of Shadow respectively. Beyond those very limited experiences, this was pretty much my first real exposure to a full Castlevania game, and I loved it. Lament of Innocence serves as an exhilarating and content-dense origin story for the lengthy but beloved video game franchise, offering players an artistically beautiful telling of Dracula's beginnings, the birth of the vampire killer Whip, and how the Belmont clan first got their start as a family known for slaying vampires and hunting the creatures of the night. It's a great beginning to a fantastic series, and more than worthy of owning its Castlevania name. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. I've actually been excited to do this video for a while now, so finally getting to make and release it has been so much fun for me. If you've enjoyed this video, then I'd ask that you hit that like button and drop a comment, as these things really help me out with getting caught by the algorithm. And if you're wanting to leave a comment, then I'd ask that you do so while telling me your favorite Castlevania game, and if this is something you'd be interested in seeing me pursue into a series of covering Castlevania games. Quick reminder that members of the channel get access to most of my videos early, plus you're supporting me and contributing coverage of these fantastic old games that deserve more coverage. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Until then, that's all I've got for you.